Hello, everyone. Welcome to Broken English Club podcast.
Imagine stepping into like a sterile, totally fluorescent lit casting room. You know the vibe.
Absolutely. The worst kind of lighting.
Right. And you're in your early 20s. You have trained exhaustively at one of the most prestigious drama schools in the entire
You
world.
really put in the hours.
Exactly. And you are currently auditioning for a commercial to sell dairy milk chocolate.
A very humbling experience, I'm sure.
Totally. But you give it everything you have. You just lay it all out there. And the casting director looks at you and says, point blank, well, actually, you just aren't what we're looking for. It's a no.
Ouch. Yeah, that's brutal.
It really is. Now imagine taking that rejection and literally hundreds more exactly like it and eventually becoming, well, one of the most recognizable actors on the planet.
It's quite the trajectory.
It really is. So welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are completely tearing down this illusion of the frictionless glide to success. We're looking at a really raw, incredibly candid speech given by actor Tom Hiddleston.
Right, the one featured on the Motivation Arc YouTube channel.
Yes, exactly. And I want to be clear right up front. We aren't endorsing any specific industry or lifestyle here. We're just impartially reporting on the fascinating ideas he presents. Because this is not a story about, destiny just handing someone a career on a silver platter.
No, not at all.
It's really an examination of what happens when you hit a brick wall at full speed.
Which is, quite frankly, precisely the objective for our analysis today. We aren't just unpacking the mechanics of the acting industry here.
Right, it's bigger than that.
Much bigger. The source material here provides this profound psychological blueprint, really. It's for how any of us, whether you're an engineer, a teacher, a startup founder, or, a middle manager.
Anyone, really.
Exactly. It's about how to navigate the grueling, totally exhausting early stages of a career. We are going to look at the mechanisms behind harnessing passion, rewiring your brain to process endless failure, and really protecting your core identity.
Especially when the world actively tries to force you into this, simplified static box.
Precise.
So the natural place to start, then, is actually before the rejection even happens. Because before you can survive failing at something, you first have to find the courage to actually care about it, right?
Right, which is harder than it sounds.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Hiddleston frames this through this concept of urgency. He shares this realization that we all essentially have two lives, and the second one begins the moment you truly internalize that you only have one.
Yeah, and he anchors that realization in a very specific story.
The one about the young man.
Yes, a young man diagnosed with a terminal illness who was given exactly 100 days to live, and rather than retreating into despair, which, would be completely understandable,
Of course.
this individual spent his final 100 days living with intense vibrancy. He just executed every single goal he had previously postponed.
Wow.
And what we're looking at here is an actual psychological phenomenon. It's known as mortality salience.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
Well, when the human brain is forced to confront its own finite nature, it often triggers a radical reevaluation of priorities.
So the small stuff just fades away.
Exactly. The petty, everyday anxieties like the fear of social embarrassment or, worrying about looking uncool,
Right.
they are suddenly recognized as completely trivial. So the neurological bandwidth that was being wasted on managing other people's opinions is suddenly reallocated toward authentic desire and legacy.
Okay, let's unpack this because so the ticking clock effectively burns away the superficial worries.
That's a good way to put it.
Thanks. And that makes sense on a theoretical level, but implementing it requires just an astonishing amount of vulnerability.
Right.
I mean, he references Shakespeare's phrase, take pains, be perfect.
Right.
And he interprets this, according to the speech, not as a demand for flawless, robotic execution, but as a mandate to put your entire heart into your work, to just care deeply.
Which is incredibly risky.
It is, because let's look at the mechanics of everyday life here. Society constantly conditions us to believe that showing intense passion is a liability.
Playing it cool is definitely the default setting for most people.
Yeah. It's essentially like wearing a heavy raincoat in the shower.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. Yes, you're wearing the raincoat, so you are perfectly safe from getting cold or vulnerable. You're protected.
But you're completely missing the experience of actually taking a shower.
Exactly. You're capping your downside by entirely destroying your upside.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the mechanism of cynical detachment. We feign apathy as this preemptive defense strategy.
To protect our egos.
Precisely. The logic is simple. If you convince yourself and everyone around you that you don't actually care about the outcome, you insulate your ego from the pain of a potential failure.
Because if you don't try, you technically can't fail.
Right. But Hiddleston's insight here is that this calculated vulnerability, taking off the raincoat, so to speak, is the absolute prerequisite for any real achievement.
You have to expose yourself.
Yes. You cannot access the upper limits of your capability while simultaneously protecting yourself from disappointment.
But wait, here's where his strategy seems to create a massive paradox to me.
How so?
Well, you decide to remove the armor. You expose your true desires, you show up early, you over-prepare, you let everyone in the room know you desperately want the job.
Okay, yeah.
By doing that, aren't you running headfirst into the exact trauma the armor was designed to prevent? I mean, isn't it infinitely harder to fail when everyone knows exactly how much you wanted to win?
Oh, it is exponentially harder, which is precisely why the dropout rate in highly competitive fields is so staggering.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When you give your passion free rein, as he puts it, you are no longer failing casually. You are failing fundamentally, at your core.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. And that brings us to the really harsh reality of his narrative. Once you commit, you don't just immediately get a reward, you get tested.
You face brutal, relentless rejection.
Exactly, which leads directly into the crucible of his formal training.
Right. Let's examine that crucible. Because he attends RDA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, and the structure of this 3-year program is just intense.
It really is designed to break you down.
Yeah, because in the first year, they actually allow the students to play to their strengths. You get to showcase what you're naturally good at.
Which builds a nice baseline of confidence.
Exactly. But the moment year 2 begins, the institution completely flips the script.
They take all that confidence away.
They throw everything at you that you cannot do. He describes working these grueling 16-hour days entirely focused on his flaws and weaknesses.
To the point where he actually lost his love for acting altogether for a while.
Which is wild, because out here in the corporate world, the prevailing advice is almost always, find your niche and play to your strengths.
Right. Optimize your talents.
Yeah. So why would an institution deliberately break a person down by forcing them to live inside their own incompetence for a year?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, relying solely on your natural strength actually creates psychological fragility.
Really? How?
Because when things come easily to you, your ego attaches your self-worth to that effortless success. So the first time you stumble, it's devastating.
Oh, I see.
The mechanism RDA is employing here is essentially systematic desensitization. If a student's greatest fear is failing publicly, the institution forces them to fail publicly for 16 hours a day for an entire year.
Wow, just total exposure therapy.
Exactly. By forcing that constant exposure in a controlled environment, the brain's amygdala, which is the fear center, eventually stops interpreting failure as a life or death threat.
It just gets used to it.
It rewires the neurological response completely. The failure goes from being this catastrophic crisis to just a mundane, manageable daily occurrence.
So they aren't trying to destroy the talent?
No, not at all. They are trying to inoculate the student against the paralysis of imperfection.
And that neurological rewiring becomes absolutely critical the moment he graduates, because the real world definitely does not offer a controlled environment.
Yo, it certainly doesn't.
Hiddleston completely dismantles this myth of choice. The idea that successful actors just sit back in a plush office while scripts pile up on their desks.
Right, the overnight success myth.
Yeah. The reality of his early 20s was just constant, grinding auditioning. Period dramas, medical soaps like Casualty, and yes, those dairy milk commercials we mentioned.
Just the barrage of
He
notes.
was constantly having doors closed in his face, being told he just wasn't the right fit. Actually, it's not you, Tom. And he admits his initial reaction was to take it deeply personally, to feel fundamentally despondent.
Which is the default human response, honestly. We all interpret rejection as an indictment of our identity.
It's hard not to.
It is. But the challenge Hiddleston identifies, and this is a hurdle every single ambitious person must clear, is shifting how you categorize that rejection.
What do you mean by categorize?
You have to move it out of the identity column and into the data column. A no at a commercial audition isn't proof that you are worthless.
It's just feedback.
Precisely. It is market feedback indicating a mismatch between their specific need and your specific offering. That's it.
And if you can't make that cognitive shift,
Then the repeated rejection will erode your underlying curiosity and you will simply stop trying.
and he hits that exact wall of exhaustion. He describes feeling like time was just sliding away in his 20s, feeling entirely stagnant.
He was stuck.
Yeah. He wasn't succeeding at acting, but he also wasn't moving on to a different career. He was trapped in this rut. And I think when a person hits that specific valley of despair, it forces a definitive choice.
You have to pivot or give up?
Exactly. You either remain stagnant and let your ambitions slowly bleed out, or you radically alter your operating system.
And he chose to alter his operating system. He reached this point of absolute exhaustion and finally realized that no external force was coming to save him.
Nobody was going to hand it to him.
Right. The shift he describes is moving from an external locus of control to an internal locus of control.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, during those early unsuccessful auditions, he admits he was being overly careful. He was operating heavily from his head, trying to anticipate exactly what the casting directors wanted.
Trying to hack the audition.
Yes. And when you do that, you're outsourcing your agency. You're letting the room dictate your performance.
You're playing a guessing game instead of playing your own game.
Precisely. Reclaiming his agency meant shifting his reliance from external validation to his own internal intuition.
Trusting his gut.
Exactly. He stopped trying to hack it and started trusting his gut, following his own curiosity about the work itself, regardless of whether it fit the casting director's preconceived notion.
And here's where it gets really interesting. To explain that shift, he uses this metaphor that I just think completely reframes the goal of a career.
The piano metaphor.
Yes. He compares acting to playing the piano, but in this case, the piano is the entire human condition.
Which is a beautiful way to think about it.
It really is. He says we all have 88 keys inside of us, every single note, and his objective shifted from just trying to get a job to wanting to play every single note available on that board.
Not just the easy ones.
Right. The joyous, warm, loving notes, sure, but also the dark, painful, discordant chords. He wants to inhabit every complex shape the human experience offers.
Now, this raises an important question. If we look at the psychology of why that is so difficult for most people, it really comes down to cognitive load.
How so? Like, why is it so hard to play all the keys?
Well, sticking to what you know requires very little neurological energy. If life is an 88-key piano, most of us just find middle C and play chopsticks our whole lives.
Because it's safe.
It's neurologically cheap. It's safe, it's predictable, and society will politely applaud because it meets their baseline expectations.
But exploring the rest of the board.
Running toward the complex chords, intentionally seeking out unfamiliar or dark emotional states, that requires immense cognitive effort. And it carries a high risk of public failure.
So people avoid it.
Most people avoid the edges of the keyboard not because they lack the capacity, but because the cognitive cost of exploring them is simply too high.
Man, that makes me want to pause and just ask you, listening to this right now,
Right.
What chords in your own career or personal life are you deliberately avoiding?
That's a great question to reflect on.
Right, like what projects or conversations or skills are you ignoring simply because playing middle C is easier? Because Hiddleston argues that exploring those complex notes requires a level of dedication he describes as an obsessive focus.
And he's remarkably self-aware here, too.
He really is. He doesn't just praise obsessive focus like it's a magic cure-all. He dissects it as a severe double-edged sword.
It is the defining paradox of high achievement, honestly. Obsessive focus is his greatest strength because it allows for total immersion. It's what enables him to access those difficult, complex chords.
But there's a cost.
A massive cost.
Yeah.
The mechanism of obsession requires sacrifice. When you allocate 99% of your cognitive bandwidth to a single pursuit, the remaining 1% is insufficient to maintain the rest of your life.
Yeah, he openly acknowledges that when he goes for a role, he goes for it at the expense of absolutely everything else.
He states he simply cannot forgive himself if he doesn't give a role totality.
But, that total dedication to playing different notes, it points to a deeper human necessity. Because think about it. If you sit at a piano for 40 years and only ever strike one key, your fingers are going to cramp and atrophy.
Absolutely.
And the exact same applies to our psychological and creative muscles. We require growth. We have to stretch beyond our baseline capabilities just to prevent ourselves from shutting down entirely.
But, and this is crucial, this introduces a massive friction point with society.
Oh, because society likes things simple.
Exactly. The moment you start exploring those new chords, the moment you step out of your comfortable middle C and project a multifaceted version of yourself into the world, the external environment will actively resist you.
They want to put you back in the box.
Human beings are pattern-recognizing creatures. Society prefers to categorize individuals into neat, static boxes because it reduces the cognitive load of having to constantly reevaluate who you are.
They want you to play the song they already know.
Precisely.
So how do you actually survive that friction? Because the source material spends significant time on dealing with the weight of other people's negative perceptions. And all the labels they try to stick on you,
It can be overwhelming.
it really can. But Hiddleston offers this highly visual way of framing disappointment and negativity. He describes bad feelings as simply clouds that pass across the sun.
Which is a classic cognitive reframing technique, actually. You see it often in mindfulness practices.
Okay, what's the psychology behind it?
He is stripping the permanence away from the emotion. When we experience severe anxiety or receive harsh criticism, the brain's default mode network tends to catastrophize.
We think it's the end of the world.
Exactly. We assume the bad feeling is a permanent new reality. By categorizing the feeling as a passing cloud, he acknowledges its presence without granting it structural authority over his life.
And he grounds this in a very specific, relatable anecdote. He was living in London, dealing with the intense pressure of his early career and going through a period of severe insomnia.
Which is a terrible combination.
The worst. The anxiety was just entirely consuming his nights. So early one summer morning, instead of just lying there ruminating, he gets up. He walks to a high hill in a local park, and he watches the sun rise over the city.
He changes his environment.
Yeah, he realizes that sometimes the only way to break out of that mental trap is to physically zoom the lens all the way out. To look around and recognize your place on a massive spinning planet.
That physical action is so important. It forces a psychological shift from a micro-obsession to a macro perspective.
From the bedroom ceiling to the whole city.
Right. When you're staring at the feeling at 3 a.m., your locus of attention is entirely internal. It's micro-focused on your own perceived inadequacies. By physically placing himself on a hill watching a sunrise, he forces his brain to process the sheer scale of the environment.
The magnitude of the world shrinks the magnitude of the anxiety.
Beautifully put. And from that macro view, he is able to embrace the inherent contradictions of being human. He actually quotes Walt Whitman's famous line,
I am large, I contain multitudes. He argues that the one unifying truth about all human beings is that we are constantly inconstant. We contradict ourselves daily. We are brave one moment and terrified the next.
"We are complex creatures."
We are. But let me push back on how practical this actually is in the real world.
Okay, go ahead.
So, what does this all mean? Like, it is a beautiful poetic thought to say, we contain multitudes. And he concludes his speech by warning that people will always form inaccurate ideas of who you are, and your job is to ignore them and plow your own furrow.
Right, to stay focused on your own path.
But look at the modern environment we're in. We live in a world driven by algorithmic sorting, social media bios, and snap judgments. Careers are literally built on branding and consistency.
That's very true.
So how does a person actually protect their internal multitudes when their entire industry demands a simple, easily digestible label?
It's a great question. And you do it by fundamentally changing what you use as your source of truth.
Meaning what?
If you rely on the algorithm, the brand, or the audience's perception to tell you who you are, you will always be a prisoner to their shifting whims. Protecting your furrow requires cultivating an impenetrable internal locus of control.
So you have to be your own anchor.
Exactly. What Hiddleston is arguing here is that external perceptions are, by definition, snapshots. A label is just a static photograph taken at a single moment in time.
But we aren't static.
No. Human beings are dynamic video recordings. We are constantly in motion.
So the external label is always outdated the very moment it's applied.
Exactly. And more importantly, the external assessment is based on incomplete data. The critics, the casting directors, the audience, they're only evaluating the final product.
They don't see the messy parts.
No. Protecting your furrow means placing your faith entirely in the unseen work. The audience was not there for the 16-hour days at drama school where your amygdala was screaming in panic. They were not in the room when you were rejected for the Dairy Milk commercial. They didn't experience the sleepless nights or that deliberate shift to trust your gut. They only see the tip of the iceberg.
Because only you possess the complete data set of your own life.
Precisely. You cannot allow an entity with only 5% of the data, meaning the outside world, to overwrite the reality of the person who holds 100% of the data, which is you.
Wow.
That is
Yeah.
what it means to protect your performance. You are not ignoring the world. You are simply recognizing that the world's limited view is mathematically incapable of capturing your actual lived experience.
You trust your own hard-won intuition over the noise of the crowd.
Exactly.
Well, let's pull all these threads together because the architecture of this journey we've mapped out is incredibly robust.
It really is a full blueprint.
We started by examining the raw urgency of realizing the clock is ticking and using that mortality salience to drop the protective governor on our engines, right? Giving ourselves permission to passionately care even when it mathematically increases the pain of failure.
And from there, we dissected the necessity of the crucible. Understanding that facing your weaknesses, whether at a place like our day or just in the grinding reality of an early career, is not a sign that you lack talent.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Right. It is the necessary mechanism of systematic desensitization. It is how you rewire your brain to view failure as mere data rather than an indictment of your identity.
Which clears the path to ultimately reclaim your agency. Moving away from trying to guess what the room wants and instead sitting down at the piano to just play all 88 keys.
Accepting the cognitive load required to explore the complex, difficult chords of your own potential, despite the friction it causes.
And finally, when the world inevitably tries to force you back into a simple, static box, you protect your multitudes by relying on that unseen work. The 95% of the iceberg that only you know exists.
It's a powerful framework. And as we conclude our analysis today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a concrete challenge based on these mechanics.
I love a good challenge. Let's hear it.
Analyze the environment you're operating in right now. Your office, your creative projects, your relationships. Are you allowing someone else's static, outdated snapshot of who you are to dictate the notes you're permitted to play?
Ooh, that's a tough question to answer, honestly.
It is. But think about it. What would happen tomorrow if you consciously decided to strike a complex chord that no one in your environment expects from you?
I absolutely love that framing. What happens when you just refuse to play middle C anymore?
Exactly.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning those labels, keep exploring your own 88 keys, and remember that the frictionless glide is always an illusion. The masterpiece requires the chaos of the studio. We will catch you next time.